All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast, all part of the Believe Network. It's a lot of great content on this show. Mitch Michals here. As always, you can find the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and on the YouTube page at Mitch Michals. We've got a lot to talk about in the tennis season. Into some indoor hard courts, some clay. This is February where they're playing literally all around the globe. And if there's anybody I can bring on the show to break it all down, it's this guy here. He called tennis at the Australian Open. He's been a veteran broadcaster, a player, a coach. He broke down on this show a couple of years ago. I think it was all the sports he played as a kid, just so many different sports. But Mark Petchey, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, it's good for you, Mitch, to get some differential between your guests. You got to get some top class ones, and then you get me on. It's good.
Yeah, variety, right? That's like tennis players, right? We like players that have different styles. So
there you go. There you go.
That's great. Well, first off, Mark, it's always great having you on. And I wanted to ask you, we put a bow on Australia in the last couple weeks, but being there, having seen some things and called matches for years now, did you have a favorite match you called, something that stood out during the 2 weeks?
I don't think it would be a favorite match that I called. It was a favorite kind of moment. Obviously, it was Maddie Keith's win. I don't think you get away from that. I just think that everything that she's been through, the expectation, just being such a teenage superstar, and then it not quite happening for her, despite having just a world-class career up until that point. The fact that she dropped the anchor in Melbourne was a moment that's going to live with everyone forever.
Yeah, that was wild. I mean, we talked about that run, and now up to number 6 in the world, career high. It's just incredible. I did want to ask you too, just being there, because you were on the call with Brad Stein, another favorite of this show, for the Rublev and Seika match, and that just seems special. And we were talking about that before, right? How he hits the ball, the special ones coming up, it just sounds different. That was something I was going to ask you too, right? Like, what doesn't translate as much? Because I feel like on TV it stood out, but in person it had to be that much different too.
Yeah, I think what stood out was the lack of time that Rublev had. I mean, the lack of time off one of his forehands. I think that it's obviously one thing to kind of showcase people's speeds with stats and everything else. But when you watch Rublev hit a ball, usually that creates time on his side of the court. It didn't create any time. And that was the most remarkable thing. He was still under pressure, even when he was fizzing his forehand. And so, that felt like, I know it's always so easy to fall into this trap, recency bias and all of that. But boy, it does feel like it's changed in the power department in the last 6 months.
Yeah, what stood out to me watching was it was so hard that he wasn't even having to paint lines all the time. Like just the pure pace was blistering the ball. And yeah, whenever you have a match where you say that guy who lost in straight sets didn't play bad, that should tell you a lot too.
Andre talked about it. Andre talked about it afterwards with his team. It was like, that's the hardest forehand that I've ever faced. I mean, so, it's not just from us sitting on the sidelines. It was somebody that was in the arena feeling it.
So the thing I got to ask you, given your history, given your role in the game and the coaching side, what's your reaction? How do you think it's been, Andy Murray, the coach? He's settled in, and obviously the results spoke for themselves. We got the news that he's going to be working with Djokovic at least through Wimbledon, which we all like. But what's your thoughts on how Murray has adjusted and how he's handled this new role as Djokovic's coach?
Yeah, well, let's be honest. He got handed the keys to the Ferrari. It's not like he got dumped the keys to me, the Skoda, as his first job, and having to sort of wheel him out in Binghamton and try and get him through. So, listen, it's a different challenge at that level. There's no question. I think Andy brought a lot of thoughtfulness. I think he brought a lot of detail. I think he brought a lot of just underlining Novak's greatness and what made him difficult to beat when Andy was playing against him. And we saw, Novak play some awesome tennis against Carlos. And that's the kind of tennis that I'm sure will keep him on tour for another couple of years, because he doesn't need to play like that every single week. But all he needs to do is play like that at the back end of a major, and he'll have 25.
Yeah, one of the things I thought just standing out, because everyone talked about how in match, like Murray's passionate, Djokovic is passionate, what that's going to mean. But it sounds like, and you'd have the insight to this, the preparation is where Murray stands out. He can come up with a game plan and study the opponents and really collaborate with a guy like Novak.
Yeah, I think that what will be interesting for Andy, and what we'll obviously hear at the backside of this relationship, whenever that is just how much detail goes in for Novak in the opening rounds, because he's a lot better. to how much detail goes into when he's taking on Carlos. Obviously, the forehand return of Carlos in that match wasn't great. I'm sure that's something that they were targeting. It can be fluctuating. It can also be awesome. You never know what you kind of get. But last, those couple of meetings in Paris at the Olympics for Novak, he certainly got the keys. And, those are the undulations in Carlos's game that you kind of have to also emphasize as a coach. Is like, he's going to light it up for a period. If you can hang with him, if you're as good as Novak, you've got a chance to capitalize on the dips into the valley.
Especially best of 5, right? Like, there's just so much time in the match. Like, you have so much,
Yeah, I agree with you. There's so much time, but I also think that actually favors Carlos, to be honest, in general, because he's got an opportunity to drop into the abyss for 45 minutes if he wanted to. He doesn't want to, and he doesn't try to, but he has that ability because of his more fluctuations, and then he pulls himself out of that tailspin. So actually, I think over 5, that's where Carlos's natural habitat is.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's when you're as good as Djokovic. When you're as good as Djokovic, maybe you have more time. Not saying it for everybody else.
Well, you've got more options, Mitch. Look at the way he flipped the switch in that match against Carlos with the injury, and he's able to gun his forehand, particularly down the line. He's obviously worked exceptionally hard on that quick second serve. He's got layers to his game that other players, you can argue, haven't necessarily always developed over the years, which is why when thrown into a situation like that was uncomfortable because of the physical discomfort, he's able to find another gear that other players simply don't have.
Are you shocked? Do you expect it? The news that Djokovic is kind of fully healthy now. Like, it seems like whatever the timetable is, and again, it's his word, we'll see what happens, but fully healthy already seems well ahead of schedule, but that's kind of just what he does.
Yeah, it is well ahead of schedule. It's phenomenal that he's looking to potentially get out to the Middle East to go and play. I mean, obviously, a couple of weeks after sort of Australia, there was some rumors only a week ago that he was only going to come back in Madrid on the clay. So never believe anything you read.
No,
especially on the internet.
No, especially here in the United States, they're happy that if he plays Indian Wells, Miami again, majors are the goal. He's got some players to chase. I do want to mention the tournaments that we had. Mark Petchey here on the Inside in Tennis podcast. Denis Shapovalov winning Dallas, 500 title. Kind of hard to understand too. I had to think back. They said biggest title of his career. I'm like, yeah, that is the biggest title of his career. Still 25 years old. Has been around and playing high level tennis since a teenager. But Mark, we know about the ebbs and flows of his game. The margins can be a little tight, but he beat 3 top 10 players. He went through a very tough, very game Dallas draw and just dismantled some very good players. What was your reaction to the Shapovalov run in Dallas and him hoisting that trophy?
Well, it was fascinating to watch, in terms of his sort of frenetic energy. It kind of started high and went this way after he got through the match against Kecmanovic, and yet his tennis went completely inverse to that. And that was what was the most astonishing kind of change. He was so amped up at the start of the tournament, and as Denis can be, sometimes not necessarily as on balance with his groundies as he wants to be, but by the end of the tournament, and I said it on X, that he basically has probably produced one of the top 5 individual performances of the year already. 46 winners, just 13 aces in that number, against somebody like Casper, who moves as well as Casper does, has a heavy ball that's coming at you, is an astonishing stat in just a couple of sets. And as I say, I think when we look back at statistically as a match at the end of this year, that will be one of the best performances that we'll have seen. It was his backhand. I mean, we know how well he can serve, and his backhand was out of it was Stan Wawrinka-esque.
It was crazy. You and Jimmy Arias calling a lot of his matches, which was a great duo. The match
Jimmy's great, huh?
Jimmy's great, yeah.
He's awesome. I love it.
What you see is what you get. Self-deprecating, very funny. The Fritz match. It was the 4-5 game in the third set. He's down love 30 against a top 5 player in the world. And he plays 4. And it was, people say, you lose matches, the player's less than you. Is there a choke? Did you ever dip? No. Shapovalov played lights out. The volley that he hit in that match, the volley that he hit in the Casper match, we're talking about a guy with net games that's good. You would say he has good net game, but he produced some of the best, maybe the best volleys we've seen in years.
Yeah. I mean, I think Jimmy said it well. Almost when you give him a tougher volley, he's actually better at that. I mean, I know it's so counterintuitive, and as a coach going out there saying, just give this guy some bang average passing shots and he's going to miss it, is not a strategy that's going to keep you employed for too long. That volley, as you say, at the back end of the match against Casper was one of the great shots. I mean, like the amount of ground that he covered in one step to get there,
Yeah.
and then the hand skills to be able to finesse it over was just awesome. And you know what? The thing about Denis, there's at times, I think there's a big disconnect with us, and I talk about us in the media, us as fans, when we look at his game, and we're kind of talking about like, wow, why is he missing so much? Why is he not just doing the basics more? Well, he did do the basics great in Dallas, but he makes a very valid point that if I don't go for those shots, I'm just a normal top 100 player. I'm 50 to 100 in the world. If I try and take the ball on and I hit the lines as often as I do, that's what separates me and puts me back in the top 10. And to be honest, there's a real logic to that. And obviously it's difficult to join the dots when you see him losing to people that you feel he shouldn't do because he's missing too much. But when you watch him put in a performance like he did at the back end of Dallas, you understand it.
You have to be true to yourself. I completely agree. The other thing, too, is we can't, fans, media members, whoever, we can't have it both ways, right? We can't look at a major final or a big match. Yes, we can. We can.
Are you kidding? That's exactly what we do. We'll edit most of this podcast and we'll sound like geniuses when it comes out.
But it's like when you see a big match and we see a player that is gun shy, why didn't you take more chances? You played passive. Okay. And then you see a guy that goes for too much. Why'd you go for too much? That's what I mean. And look, there's times when it's fair to criticize a player. Strategy was bad. They were off. It's totally fair. I love that he's honest about the fact that, look, this is what makes me who I am. Now, there's times when you have to rein it in. I guess and I could ask you this, if you were his coach, how do you balance that? A player that has this ability, but you don't want him going for that necessarily every time. So as a coach, how would you counteract that?
Well, I think that the bottom line is that his base level just needs to not be too low. And we know his top end is right at the best and right with the best, but it's his base level in those tournaments. The problem at times, obviously he's had the knee injury, so we also need to sort of specify that.
Yeah.
But also, if you can't get yourself out of the first two hurdles in a tournament each week, you don't get to see what we saw at the weekend in Dallas often enough. Yeah. So his conundrum is kind of figuring out a way to get past players in those opening couple of rounds so that we see the best of him. I mean, Andy Roddick talked about it often. He says, I never used to play my best tennis in rounds sort of 1 and 2 or matches 1 and 2 in a tournament. But by the end of the tournament, that's when I'm hitting the ball my best. And so that's Denis's goal. If I can keep making consistent quarterfinals at these tournaments, I'm dangerous. There's a lot of silverware coming my way.
I think so. I think that was good to see him. Love having him back in the mix. Also, I mean, Casper Ruud lost in the final, but another good showing for him. I just feel like, Mark, and I could be off here, but I feel like his whole career, it's going to go by, and I'm always going to say he was underrated. Like, it just seems like he just churns out results. And, I know he's got a lot of points to defend. This was a good get back on track. He did a lot of good things. He's an exceptional athlete. I think this was a proud showing for him, even though the final didn't go his way.
Listen, the more matches he picks up on the hard courts, and listen, he's not deficient on hard, but the more points that he picks up when he's playing indoors on hard, and this kind of season sets him up so beautifully for the clay events. Indian Wells should suit him, in terms of the conditions there. I know, maybe the heavier conditions, the spin doesn't react quite as well as he would like. And maybe he gets a bit too distracted with the golf courses that are out in the desert. So I don't know whether that and the battles with his dad creep over, but it should be a tournament that he feels very comfortable at, as he has proved in Miami in the past, getting to the final there in 2022. But obviously, if he loses too much in this period, he loses a bit of confidence, and that can sometimes transfer onto clay. We had that in 23 with Casper, didn't we? I mean, he only picked up, 16 wins ahead of Roland Garros last year because he had a better start to the year. This period, he had 35 going into Roland Garros. Listen, in some ways, unfortunately, these guys are now benchmarked, and Casper's one of them. If you don't win a major, and you've been to 3 finals, we're gonna say that you've been underrated. He's already maxed way further than anyone thought when he walked through the doors at Rafa's Academy when he was 19. There was not a person, including Uncle Tony, that thought this guy was going to be 3 in the world or 2 in the world, even back then. So listen, his career's been a success if he hung up his rackets tomorrow.
He lost to Alcaraz, Nadal, and Djokovic in major finals. Like I know it's
3 bums.
yeah. I mean, what are we doing? And the Alcaraz match, he was 1 match away from world number 1. So I know there's perspective to put there.
Yeah.
Also, him and Carlos this weekend, different tournaments, but leading the no strip movement. Is this going to be a takeover in tennis?
I mean, it could well be. Listen, they're creatures of habit. They're looking for the edge. Some players will feel comfortable. We know that Nicolas Jarry, because he had the deviated septum, was one of the first people to kind of use it. He talked about a 30 to 40% increase in oxygen when he with the breathing technique going through the nose. If that number's correct, you're probably going to see players use it because, let's be honest, this is a physically demanding sport. The more oxygen you can get in through your lungs, through your nose, you're going to recover quicker. So, listen, I don't think so, but I'm also not saying it's not a possibility.
Yeah, we had Casper say he didn't exactly go, high class, high place. He kind of just bought it online. So we'll see if there's a performance-based one coming out soon. More stuff from Dallas, though, Mark, and we talked about it a little bit, too. A lot of Americans bounced early, some of the big names. And I know not every match, not every upset's the same. There's different circumstances, but this is kind of maybe a situation where, and you can allude to this too, but the season is long. We know about this. Some players maybe could have benefited by taking some time to regroup after Australia, gearing up for a lot of big tournaments in North America, and then obviously the clay season.
Yeah, listen, I mean, Mitch, you and I will be, well, I'll be balder than I am already. I'll also be a lot older and a lot fatter, but we will still be talking about this when we hit that kind of grade in our physical demise. Listen, tennis moves at a glacial pace, and I don't see what we have obviously seen over the last 48 hours is that people and tournaments like Marseille tournament director saying that he believes that it's an open secret that there'll be a Masters 1000 in Saudi Arabia in February. So obviously we're going to lose some of these 250s that we currently have. There's going to be obviously a significant kind of Middle Eastern swing if what he says is true, but he was pretty open and candid that this was going to happen. That's good news for Australia, obviously, because that seemed like the worst place possible to insert it ahead of Australia. Coming off a season break, playing one of the 10 big tournaments of the year out of the gates before the Australia. I'm just thinking that's a recipe for disaster. So listen, it seems like we're going to just get it more crowded.
Yeah, that's, I don't want to say
Where's
my fear.
Where's Davis Cup going to go in there? Where's Davis Cup going to go? If you're going to have a 12-day jamboree out in Saudi Arabia, where's that going to go? I mean, listen, it's complete madness.
And the 2-week thing too, because like they're not congruent. They go directly against each other. We're filling up the schedule, but we're doing it with long, drawn-out events. Like that's where I'm not.
It's revenue growth. Listen, we all know why. We all know why these tournaments have gone longer. It's for revenue growth, and so the players obviously have a decision to make alongside everything else. Is listen, are we willing to take a pay kind of cut? Are we willing to take a cut to our pension contributions by having shorter tournaments? And if we are, fair enough. Obviously, the upside for the fans is they get a few more days, but do they really get more days? Most of the marquee guys and girls don't turn up until like 3 or 4 days into the event. So it's like, well, what are we selling the emperor's new clothes here a little bit on these 12-day tournaments? Because there's a sense that I feel we are. And we're as you say, that the narrative is like we need to create more space, but all we're doing is bundling more days together.
In qualifying at the 1 week, I mean, there's not many left, hardly any, but look at Monte Carlo qualifying and just how awesome that event is versus, I'm with you. I'm with you completely. Last thing, though, on Dallas, I wanted to ask you. It had been a while, and I guess if anyone was going to speak out, it was going to be Reilly Opelka, but we got a player lashing out a little bit. And look, I was actually impressed that he held serve after and served out the match, given what happened. But, he's going to, be subject to a fine. I think he understands that. But we, again, can't have it both ways. I like players speaking out. He felt like he was wronged, and he said what he needed to say.
Love Reilly. Listen, I do think that, we live in a world where everyone's like become pretty triggered about everything. I don't want to say soft, because not everyone's soft, but pretty much everyone's triggered.
Yeah.
If you become an official of a sport, there's a good chance that you have had a good conversation with yourself saying at some point, somebody's going to be deeply unhappy with me and say something that they perhaps may regret in time, may not. genuinely believe that that's the case.
Yeah.
Whatever. That's the pact you make as an official. Is it, so like, Riley will take whatever is coming his way or not coming his way, and Greg will brush it off and move on to the next tournament. I can tell you, Carlos Bernardes, he was, had a conversation down on St Kilda Beach in Melbourne a few years ago, and he was like, I understand why ELC's coming in, but as an official, we like the interaction. We like, the players, we like that side of the drama. So, from that point of view, I think we all need to be like careful that we're not all just going, oh, it's so out. I mean, he said what he said. Honestly, it's just not that big a deal.
ELC coming in on clay. Get ready for it. I know who I'm talking to here, but yeah, we're gonna, again, we like drama. It seems like we're running from it a little bit in tennis, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And also, problems aren't going away. Just want to remind that. Like, it's not like every call is going to be
we're going to
good.
get video replays at all the Masters 1000s now. So that's getting rolled out at Indian Wells. That's the start. So we're going to get video replays for double bounces and for obviously touches. And, there's still got to be a bit of common sense applied for the umpire. So that, those are good moves by the tour.
Yeah, certainly are. More here with Mark Petchey on the Inside in Tennis podcast. We're discussing all the happenings February 2025. We've got a lot of tournaments around the world right now. Last week in Rotterdam, Carlos Alcaraz wins, hard to believe, his first indoor title. Guy's won so much already at such a young age. He did it by defeating some good players. Hubie Hurkacz in the semis, Alex de Minaur in the final, 3-set matches pushed. Alcaraz, there's really nothing quite like him in all of sport, Mark. I know that sometimes it's not the cleanest and he might dip a little bit, but when he's on, he's captivating the audience. It really is hard to beat.
Listen, he's a global superstar. He's got eyeballs gravitating towards tennis so quickly. It's kind of scary how fast he's jumped into the lane vacated by Rafa and Roger, alongside Jannik as well. But obviously, there's an attraction to the way that Carlos plays because there's jeopardy. And you're never quite sure at times what's going to happen. There's showtime and there's some suboptimal times. But I love it. I as a coach, you probably want to try and find a slightly sort of condensed version of that, so that the sustainability's there. But from a fan's perspective, I mean, it is just an awesome watch. His rally tolerance is phenomenal, but obviously a lot of it is finished up at the net. So it's a different type of rally tolerance to we see with Jannik or Novak when they're locked down. His is like, I'm still in this rally, but I'm going to finish a lot of the points or make you miss when I come to net. So it's a completely different style.
He hit the reset button pretty good. I mean, obviously the Australia loss was tough. Cleared his head a little bit, came out good. Another haircut. He seems like every 2 weeks it's like another haircut for Carlos. But
no tattoo, but a haircut.
No tattoo, right? But that was good to see. And really, when I was watching the match, especially Hubie, who looked very, very good in that match, I started to think, okay, like, this player is so tough to beat. Hubie was trying to take it to him. Like, I thought the way Hubie played, it didn't get the job done. If you're going to try to attack him and just try to keep the pace on him and just try to shorten points, Hubie put forth the best effort. And I thought, won the set, but ultimately beating this guy is a very, very tough task.
Listen, Carlos loves playing tennis and he loves entertaining. And I think that, he's not going to be somebody that bothers and gets worried that he goes to 3 sets. Obviously, Jannik has been somebody that's just putting the sword through people in straights. He's not getting beaten in straights. Carlos is a guy that I think is going to have, a lot more sort of fluctuations over the course of a season. I don't think he's going to be necessarily somebody we talk about that's having a Johnny Mac type season or a Fed type season where they're barely losing 3 or 4 matches. But that's kind of the attraction of him. And, so from that point of view, his peak, I think, is better than in match. I'm not saying about whole of trophies, but I think his peak in match is probably higher than Jannik's. But his base level at times is going to be lower, and that's what's going to be phenomenal to watch.
That is fun. That's it right there, right? Like higher peak, but maybe not higher base level. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's a different type of fire and ice for me. Yeah. We had Johnny Mac, but that was very temperament. It was obviously hugely different back there with Ivan, with Bjorn playing at the back of the court a lot, although that was a bit of a misconception when he stepped onto the grass because Bjorn did serve and volley quite a bit. But John was just like that tempestuous character.
Yeah.
We don't, Carlos is just happy, and Jannik is kind of like they're locked in all the
Yeah.
time. But it is a Fire and Ice 2.0.
Also, kids out there listening, and I know the grass court season is just so short. Imagine going right off.
Kids listening to this show, Mitch.
Yeah, we got young
be
fans.
Careful.
Yeah, we got young fans. The clay court season right to grass. There was not even that extra week, so you're literally winning Roland Garros for Bjorn Borg and going right to grass. Maybe getting a hit or two, and then just winning Wimbledon.
That's why you can't. That's why you can't judge eras. Goat debate, all of that, because that's a ludicrous effort from what he achieved.
Insane. Well. What do you think? What do you think, Mark, about the Demon, Alex de Minaur? Another final Rotterdam, loses to another great player. Obviously, Sinner last year, Alcaraz this year, up to a career high number 6. He just keeps progressing. He keeps looking better. He looks stronger out there. I don't know. The ceiling talk is tough, but he's right on the verge of a top 5 ranking, which years ago would have seemed like a tall task. But he just keeps improving, pushing the greats in this sport.
Yeah, I mean, disappointing couple of losses in the final, Rotterdam. As you say, I mean, you're not going to get past those guys. Really got to start questioning why you're still staying in the sport. So listen, I can't admire Alex more as a person, but also as a competitor, and I would defend him to the hilt. He is maxing out everything that he has at his disposal, and he would continue to look under new rocks to find a new dimension to his game, to figure out a way that he can kind of compete consistently with these guys. Obviously, he talked about it, that his game matches up a little bit better with Carlos. The problem with that narrative for me is that it matches up well when Carlos doesn't play as well. And that's not necessarily that comfortable if you really analyze it, if you're sitting in de Minaur's camp, because Jannik doesn't have those drops, which we obviously saw in that demolition job in Australia. But is it really matching up well against Carlos, or is it more dependent on the fact that Carlos ends up missing a few more shots? He gives you a few more targets by coming in. And that would be probably my biggest thing. But all I will say is that Alex will figure out a way to improve, even if it's just 0.2% to give himself a chance of winning a major. And you know what? He may not have to go past Carlos and Jannik to win a major. So there's always that. Everyone's going, well, how could he possibly? He can win one. It's not for sure. But if he takes on somebody like Sasha Zverev in the final of a major, who hasn't won one at that stage, the pressure's up for grabs for both those two players.
I think, and I love de Minaur too, but that might be a reflection on matching up versus a guy who's 10-0 against you versus, Alcaraz, which is a tough matchup either way. But he just works so hard out there. That's what's inspiring. Even if you're not a diehard tennis fan, you watch him play, you watch how hard he's working, what he's willing to do, the time he puts in. It's impressive. And also very funny. I mean, if you saw Bencic'S win the title and Bolter's like, all right, have a baby, win a 500. He's like, hey, his fiance, is there something you need to tell me, or what's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, she's already won a 500, didn't she?
Yeah.
Didn't she win the San Diego last year? So she's just missing the baby right now. But that's on Alex. But anyway, he's got a wedding to pay for.
He does. Also, shout out to semifinalist Matteo Bellucci, another guy who gets through Medvedev, gets through Tsitsipas. What's he at, number 70 now? 68, top 70. So, hey, some of these, we talk about it, a 500 event, some of these big runs can kind of reset things and change your life a little bit.
Yeah, and he's sort of been a little quiet after that little burst that we saw in Atlanta and Washington last year. He had the quick turnaround, making quarters in Atlanta. He jumped on a flight, got to Washington at like whatever o'clock in the morning, and then ended up qualifying there, put some points on the board. Listen, he's got a great game. He's a little underpowered, but he's got one of those kind of nasty little games that will pick him up a lot of wins if you're not playing at your best. He's going to pick you off at times. And, it's just great to see those sort of players still being able to survive in what is becoming a very, very power-dominated sport. So he's a great character. He does like to do a few too many showboating things, a little erroneous. It's a little unnecessary showboating, but we love it. And again, just another great example of the Italian sort of ecosystem being able to allow very different styles of players to coming through. There's no one blueprint for Italian men.
No, there isn't. It's I've been saying it's the U.S. is chasing Italy. Italy's been the standard. U.S. has been getting there, but Italy has just been putting it on. Well, on the women's side, Mark, I alluded to it, but Belinda Bencic, she gives birth and then she comes back. She does it also kind of smartly, which we can get into too. She plays a lot of smaller events. She's going to build up her match toughness. And she goes back to Abu Dhabi, where she has not lost. 2 times she's gone, 2-time champion there now. Goes through Rybakina on the semis, beats Ashlyn Kruger, American youngster coming up there. But Belinda Bencic, another player, I'm just so impressed with her game. I've always been a fan of how she plays tennis, and does a great job winning, as a mother, a big title.
You know what? The thing with Belinda is that obviously she's kind of a high risk player. She's obviously somebody that loves to take the ball down the line and hit it pretty flat. So in the bigger moments in the past, you kind of felt like that also doesn't translate great in the big moments, because your margin goes, you can get a bit tentative. And we obviously saw the second serve kind of falter at times. She looks, I mean, one of the biggest differences to me is that she looks so much calmer. She looks as though, there's another world out there.
Yeah.
I've got my daughter Bella. I'm happily married. Life is good, but there's also like just this bigger part of my life. And therefore the tennis side of things, although significant and hugely rewarding, just isn't quite the be all and end all, the life and death situation that it seemed to her at the start.
I can't take credit for it. This is the John Wertheim special, but when you have a child and you come back into tennis, it snaps you. You can't go one foot in, 1 foot out in a sport as demanding as this. So if you make that commitment, you're really in, and you understand perspective, but you also know what it takes and how it can demand so much from you. So yeah, I'm with you. And she has weapons too. There might be, a big aggressive style of play that she plays, but she's proven she's not afraid of any of these players. She's got wins over basically all the top players. And yeah, I saw the comparison online. I think it's true. Like, if we're looking for the next Kim Clijsters as a mother to win a slam, this might be someone to put her hat in the race. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think Svitolina got inside the world's top 40 in 7 events. I think this Belinda's 8th. But listen, I think the other thing that we need to remember is, we've been talking a lot about it recently in tennis, is the ball. It's kind of degrading pretty quick. It's getting a bit heavier. I think that suits somebody like Bencic. I think, when you look at these power players, when they're somebody that feel like they can swing and the ball's they're not going to lose the ball long, they become even more dangerous.
They do. And any thoughts on Ashlyn Kruger? I mean, already number 40, this American who's 19, 20 years old. 20. Yeah. So still has, look, for her size, over 6 feet tall, first thing that stands out to me, a player like that, size like that, is movement. She moves pretty well and has some weapons. And I think this was a great showing. She gets to the final, wins a set. I think this is someone to put a pin in to see where the development goes.
Yeah, I think so. Great shout out to Michael Joyce. I think he's doing another great job. Obviously, it's not easy to bring somebody through as quickly as he's done at 20 years old, as you say, to get into the world's top 40. Obviously, this is a real statement week. I know she lost early this week in Doha, but the reality is that's a very, very difficult spin around, and you would take a great week in Abu Dhabi for an early round loss this week. But I think, that there's just great ceiling room. The one area that I think for somebody that's as tall as she is, that she needs to just kind of figure out is how she protects her second serve a little bit better against these fast returners, the Sabalenkas, the Swiatek's. She got beaten hands down by Bencic in that department as the match wore on, and even in the opening set. It was kind of a weird one. She served 10 doubles in that first set, then didn't really serve any doubles. And that's where I think the balance is going to be. Not serving too many doubles is probably not a great thing for her, because she's not taking enough risk. There needs to be kind of a happy medium on, okay, you drop in 3 doubles a set, that's probably okay, because you're probably hitting your speed, you're hitting your spots on your second, protecting it. 10's too high, 0 is too low because you're being too conservative. But the Michael's a bright guy, and he understands tennis better than I do, so he'll figure it out.
I like that too, by the way, just to translate it for the American fans, the American football fans. 0 is too conservative. That's like a quarterback that doesn't throw any interceptions. You're just not taking chances out there.
Correct.
So that,
I mean, it's the same with the guys on the tour. Anyone over 6'4" that's not serving any doubles is just pushing their second serve.
Yeah. Well, hey, she's number 40, another American woman, 3 in the top 6 right now, Mark. This is, it's still coming along. So
yeah, you guys are in good shape. I mean, it's always kind of weird, like the last 6 months, there's been lots of talk about, obviously, performance program over here in the US, which is where I am at the moment. And obviously some of the sort of changes, they put a big group together I don't think have chatted that much, to be honest, about what they want to do. But I mean, you guys are in such rude health. I wouldn't change anything. Warren Buffett is the guru of that.
Yeah.
There's times when you just need to do nothing, and right now I would just keep doing what everyone's doing until evidence is provided that there's not another group of players coming through.
Yeah, it's been remarkable to see. Last thing on last weekend, and it's a somber note, but we have to bring this up. Just brutal news for Luca Pouille for what went down with him. The Achilles injury, he's already had surgery, doesn't know what his future is going to hold, but someone that is a likable guy, has worked so hard, has achieved great things, being Rafael Nadal in the U.S. Open. But it's just another reminder of how brutal sport can be and how nothing's guaranteed. But to see that happen, a crushing injury to someone so respected by his peers, was tough.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when it happened as well, middle of the match, just a normal kind of drop shot that he tried to set off for, and then bang, the Achilles goes, and obviously, that's a long, hard road back. I don't know if he's actually going to call time on his career, but it's got to be close to making him think that it's not worth trying to come back, unless he wants to come back for a nice farewell at Roland Garros or something. But the Achilles are not injuries you ever want, but particularly this stage of his career. So yeah, tough luck.
In America, there's some revolutionary procedures, so that is good. But tennis is maybe the worst sport to have this type of injury in, with how much you move. So we wish.
Well, unless he wants to go and play dubs. But he's only got half the court that he can cover.
Maybe. Hey, $1 million mixed double U.S. Open. Maybe. I don't know.
Mixed doubles EXO. Gotta love it.
There it is. All right, Mark Petchey, Inside In Tennis Podcast, wrapping up with a few things. Big event. We got a premiere in Qatar right now on the women's side, and already has been some explosive upsets taking place. Coco Gauff falls to Marta Kostyuk this morning. Was catching up on that match before we started, and look, Gauff has not had much success in this event 2 years in a row, but Marta is tough, and that's what I keep coming back to. She likes it when it's a fight out there, when it's a rock fight, when it's a very physical match, and I thought she played aggressive, her normal style, and she really took it to Coco and took the match.
She played great. I think one of the things about this matchup for Coco, and tennis is a matchup in styles, Mitch, is that she almost moves as well as Coco does. Not quite, but she's not far off it in terms of her movement. And I think that that causes problems for Coco, because obviously that becomes a big test of her forehand to try and hit winners, to try and break Kostyuk down. She can't just lean on the backhand. That just does too much heavy lifting in a matchup of like this. Then you get somebody like Kostyuk that will take on a bit of a risk on the return of serve on the second, and then you see a little fallibility in the double faults again. Tough matchup. Also a place that, as you say, she hasn't historically done well. That can play on a player's mind. Yeah, not hitting the glass yet. It's not an emergency. No. It's been a great start to the season for Coco, but just a toughish loss.
Toughish loss. Also, good to see Ons Jabeur playing well again. And if anything was going to bring it out of her, it's playing in this region of the world. Nice showing last week, and then beats Qinwen Zhang in that match, and really wins it going away. It's good to see Ons back in the mix, and that's another. It's got that superstar quality. I think it's pretty easy to see.
Yeah, it is. Started playing some great tennis down in Melbourne when I was there, Mitch, watching her and commentating on her matches. I still feel like she's re-finding her match fitness. It's one thing to do all of the hard work and the hard yards in practice, but the emotional toll, the finesse that you see that obviously she plays with, the anticipation of having to kind of pick up when she's hit a drop shot, all of those things take a bit of time. But the ball striking was back, the confidence is back, and most importantly, the joy is back. And I'm not surprised she picked up a top 10 win.
Yeah. We got Pegula won today as we record this. She beats Svitolina. Rybakina won over Stearns. And Sabalenka's in a battle right now with Alexandrova. But some top players in this event. Iga's going to be playing Niskova next. So this is a good field, Mark. And this is a chance for a lot of the top players to showcase what they can do.
Yeah, listen, I think it's always it's obviously great for the players. They're making a lot of money. It's obviously great for the sort of the Middle Eastern market that you've got these tournaments. Again, it goes back to that sort of, that conversation that, you've got this tournament that looks an awful lot like Indian Wells on the women's side coming up as well. We just got to be careful in tennis that we don't just keep offering up the same meal night in, night out, because as good as I love steak and chips, I don't want it 7 days a week.
No, that'd be a lot of steak. you have the Delray Beach Open for the men, which is good to have the Americans have a chance to play. There's some good names in that one. And then, yeah, you have the Golden Swing too, Mark, which it's been in the news that, there might be some changes. I want to defer to the experts, and you're the closest one I know to an expert on this right now. Yeah, I think maybe behind you there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good.
The
I'll just
idea,
go get them.
we know it's a business. We also know what this event means. But what's your thoughts on the idea that if this stays alive, it might mean going to hard court?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think in my tennis soul, with my head in my tennis soul, I would love it to stay on clay. I think we're getting dangerously close to not having enough clay court events, and I think that would be a massive shame. But then it goes back into like having some coherent thinking amongst the tours and everybody else that's involved in that, and that risk is low. It's never zero, but it's low that happens. So from their perspective, they've obviously got Zverev down there. That's a good pick. But you're basically obviously having to open up your purse strings to get these players to kind of change their schedule to come down on clay for some reason. And obviously Cam Norrie a couple of years ago went down there because he wanted to get some clay court matches. He'd actually played Davis Cup on clay in Colombia, I believe. And then he also thought it was good to get that kind of bulk of matches in on clay ahead of Roland Garros to try and sort of, get ahead of the curve. So there's that kind of thinking. However, for these tournaments, you totally understand it. It's like, you're not probably going to get the best players, coming down there now with somebody like Alcaraz and Sinner, who are going to be neck and neck for the next few years for world number one. They're going to want to play on tournaments that give them the best base to go into Indian Wells and Miami to potentially pick up a couple of thousand points over that month. So it does make sense to go onto hard courts for these events so that they can go and get the best players. And ultimately, Mitch, whether we like it or not, and I know there's a lot of players that don't want to hear it, this is a star-driven sport. And the more stars you get at your event, the greater the eyeballs you're going to have on it.
These are two different thoughts and two different issues, right? The fact that it's a clay event in February, hard court clay, hard court doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But I'm with you in the other stat, the stat that 64% of events on the tour are hard court already. So that's where we are. And that's, we're going to add to that if we change this. So it's tough. But like you said, you want to get the stars there. It's going to take something like this because they have different priorities. So I want to reiterate, I know I've talked to a few Central American, South American players. This means so much to them to have this event on the calendar that we can't, I say that like, we can't lose that.
Well, that's the mission statement, keep the events. And unfortunately, if we have to lose the clay, then we lose the clay. It would be a shame.
Certainly would be. It's never a shame talking tennis with Mark Petchey here on the Inside in Tennis podcast. It's always a pleasure. Last thing, though, I have to ask you. So Roger Federer sold a racket from Wimbledon, sold for $100K in an auction. What can we get for a Mark Petchey game?
I'd have to pay someone, Mitch. Mitch, I'd have to pay someone to take the racket off me. No. I've got to pay packaging and post, and then I'd have to pay for like the fact that they've got to store it somewhere in their house that no one can see it. I reckon I'd probably have to drop about $220.
Autograph would cost you more if you signed it. It would cost you more.
Yeah. Well, you can go and ask John Wertheim. He's got one of my old Max 200Gs from New Haven from about 20. You can ask him to stick that on eBay. I guarantee he's going to get no takers.
Oh, man, that's so funny. Yeah, well, we'll see. You never know. The market, everything, retro market's coming back, so who knows?
Yeah, like I said about sort of tennis, making sense. It's a low risk, but it's never zero. That's actually something that is zero, Mitch.
We found zero. Mark Petchey, always a pleasure. Always a great guest. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Mitch, always a pleasure as well. Anytime. Take care.
That was Mark Petchey. This was the Inside in Tennis podcast. Again, we're on all your platforms. Go to Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon Music, and watch the video episode of this show on YouTube. The channel's at Mitch Michals. You can follow us on X. You can follow us on social media. But it's an interesting and fun time to be a tennis fan. Always is. Thank you to Mark Petchey. Thanks to everybody out there for listening or watching. This was the Inside in Tennis podcast. We'll talk to you soon.